Today's daf yomi is Bava Metzia 95. Daf yomi is dedicated for a shmira for Am Yisrael, a yeshua for the chayalim, atzol for the shvuyim. So we're discussing the laws of a borrower, and the Gemara asks the question: Kineva v'aveda b'shoel meinalan. How do we know that we're 95a, fourth line? How do we know that a borrower, if the object is stolen from the borrower, that he is going to be considered to be responsible if the object is stolen or lost? Gemara says, "V'chitema neilaf mishvuro mesa." And if you want to say that, we'll learn it out from the fact that the Torah says that if the animal dies by an accident, i.e., if it breaks or if it dies, if there is responsible, then for sure, where there's a higher level of negligence, i.e., if it's stolen or lost, for sure he should be responsible. The Gemara says, but that's faulty logic because the difference about Shvura Mesa is that it's broken forever. You're not going to be able to the owner can never work out and go and get it. Tomar Begneva and Veda, so you can't compare it to the case of loss or theft, the Afshar Mitrach Vasuye, where he can go and he work and get it. Ella, so therefore, what's the source for the borrower being responsible by theft or loss? Kihadatanya, it's from the following brisa. It says, Vinish Baro Mace, if it breaks or if it dies, which teaches us, I only know that the borrower is responsible for breaking or death. How do we know he's responsible also for theft and loss? Amras Kavachomer, we're going to say it's a logical argument. Just like a paid watchman, just like a paid watchman is going to be responsible for an accident, for broken and death, and he's going to be responsible for theft and loss. A borrower who's responsible for death and broken, for sure he should be responsible for theft and loss. And this is a logical argument that there's no possible response that you can make to it. What do you mean by what does it mean that there's no possible response? Because if you would say, if you would challenge that Kavachomer by saying, so you could say that it's possible that the Shomer Sachar can end up paying double if it be a case where he claims it was stolen by armed robbers, and then in the end it turns out that he made that up, he'd end up paying double, whereas the borrower can never end up paying double, because if he claimed it was stolen, he would still be responsible. So you might think that therefore you can't learn from the case of a Shomer Sachar, you can't learn a Kavachomer from a paid watchman to a borrower. So for this reason, the Gemara says, the fact that the borrower has to pay the principal always, that's going to make him a more severe case than the renter, than the paid worker. Or by the same, or alternatively, you could say, Kasavar Wisdom Mizuyan Gazlanhu. Or alternatively, you could say that the armed robbers are not going to be considered like thieves. For a thief, you pay double. But for an armed robber, you only pay one time. So even if you claim it was stolen, if it was an armed robber, it's not a thief, according to this position, and say therefore the borrower is always more severe than the renter. So anyway, the Gemara says, we understand that the borrower is going to be responsible for theft and loss when the owner is not with him. But how do we know that if the owner is with him? With Torah Minoan, we've already said that if the owner is with him in a case of an accident, the borrower is exempt. What about if the owner is with him in a case of theft or loss? How do we know there too the borrower should be exempt? How do we know that the leniency of Bava Imo extends not only to an accident but even to a theft case? So the Gemara says, if you want to say, let's learn out from the case where the animal was an accident, it died or it broke. How can you learn out from there? That's an accident. So how can you learn from there that you'll be exempt in a case of theft or loss? So learn out from a paid watchman that just like a paid watchman is exempt if the owner is with him, so to a borrower is exempt if the paid watchman is with him. So the Gemara says, But wait 1 second, the Shomer Sachar Gufei Minoa. And how do we know that the Shomer Sachar is himself exempt if the owner is with him when it was stolen? So Gemara says, Gar mechiyuvei de Shomer Sachar mechiyuvei de Shol. We learn out the fact that the paid watchman is liable from the fact that the borrower is liable. And Ma'ala the Baal and Potter, just like the borrower, the owner is exempt. Avkam Baal and Potter. So too, in the case of the Shomer Sachar, the borrower is going to be exempt in this case. So the Gemara says, "B'mai gamar," with what was the way that you learned this law that the Shomer Sachar is going to be the law, the obligation of the Shomer Sachar are learned out from the Shoel. So how are you going to? So how are you going to learn that out from the borrower? Iba mematzinu. If you're going to say that, just like we find that the obligations of the Shoel by an accident are exempt if the owner was with him, so too the Shomer Sachar will be exempt. We could challenge that just like we challenged in the other circumstance. How do we challenge it? That we said shekain ba'ones, because we see that the Torah just here, right here's a Gemara guy. So because we say by an accident that we say that the Torah exempts the owner, the borrower, by an accident, and you can't learn from this to a Shomer Sachar. So therefore, the Gemara says Ela Amakra. It's based upon the fact that the passage says by a borrower. The passage says v'chi yishol. It says when a person will borrow, but it says it adds a letter vav. Vav Moses al inyan rishon v'yomod el yom mitachton. So the letter vav comes to tell us that the borrowing case of the borrowing is adding on to the case of the hired worker, and it's basically a continuation that they have the same law. The yomod el yom mitachton. We learn the law of the Shomer Sachar from the law of the borrower. So the Gemara says vakati, but still that doesn't solve anything. Even though we know that the source for the Shomer Sachar is that, even though we know that the Shomer Sachar is going to be exempt because the owner is with him, and we learned it out from a borrower, Vakati, still we have a question. Shomer Sachar lo gamer. How can we learn out that the borrower himself is exempt if it was stolen or lost while it was with him? We can't learn it out from the Shomer Sachar because we could challenge Shomer Sachar shekain pater b'shvur mesa. Tomer Shol shachai b'shvur mesa. How can we say that the borrower is going to be exempt if the owner is with him, because we learn out from by a case of theft or loss, and learning it out from the Shomer Sachar. We can't learn out from the Shomer Sachar. Shomer Sachar himself is always exempt by a case of accident. And how can we learn out from there to a borrower? Ella Genevu Veda B'Shol Uchiyuva. And how do we know that a borrower himself is responsible if it was stolen or lost? The Gomer Mishomer Sachar. We learn out from a Shomer Sachar. Well, if that's the case, Dayo Lavo Minadin Liotzkin Nidon. So if the whole source that a borrower is if the whole source that a paid watchman is, if the whole source that a borrower is responsible for theft or loss comes from the fact that the paid watchman is responsible for theft and loss, then the borrower is limited by the full extent of the law that it's applied to the Shomer Sachar. It's just like the Shomer Sachar would be exempt in the case where the owner is with him, so too the borrower would be exempt under those circumstances. So because we say just like theft or loss, with the Shomer Sachar, if the owner is with him, he'll be exempt. So to a borrower, theft and loss, if the owner is with him, he'll be exempt. The Gemara says, well, not everybody accepts this principle of dayo, that you're limited by the law, by the source law. According to one who doesn't accept this position of dayo, how would he understand it? It's based upon the fact that the pasuk says, Vav Mosafal Inyan Rishon Lilyon Al Yom Mitachtim Mitachtim Elyon. So the fact that there's a vav in the passage about borrowing, which is the third passage, first we start with Shomer Chinam, then we start with the paid watchman, and then we go to the borrower, and then there's a vav in the passage that relates to borrowing. So that teaches us that the two passages we can compare the laws of the hired worker to the borrower. So now the Gemara asks a fundamental question. Itmar. So we've established that the borrower is going to be exempt if the owner is with him by an accident, and also by a case of theft or loss. Let's say, what about by a Shomer Chinam, by an unpaid watchman, i.e. a case of negligence? Itmar Pshia Babalim. Let's say there's a case of negligence by the owner. Let's say the owner was negligent. Let's say the borrower was negligent, but the owner was with him. So would we say that he's going to be exempt under those circumstances One says he's responsible, one says he's exempt. The one who says responsible, the one who says he's responsible says the verse about a borrower is expounded to the passage before him, i.e., to the passage that relates to Shomer Sachar, but not to the passage two before, which is the Shomer Chinam. Hilkach and Bava Metzia. Therefore, the leniency of if the owner is with him, he doesn't have to pay. As Shomer Chinam will ksiv. It's not written with respect to an unpaid watchman. Upshia nami the Shomer Sachar b'shol will ksiv. And negligence also is not written by a paid watchman, a borrower. Hilkach b'Shomer Sachar b'shol. So therefore, if that's the case, Hilkach, therefore, if that's the case, b'Shomer Sachar b'shol l'chayev hasyu b'kav v'chomer mishomer chinam. So therefore, by a Shomer Sachar and a borrower, it's telling us that they're going to be obligated from a kav v'chomer from a Shomer Chinam. That if a Shomer Chinam who is much less severe than a borrower and a paid renter, if he's going to be responsible for negligence, even if the owner is with him, for sure the Shomer Sachar and the Shoel will be responsible for negligence if the owner is with him. Aval bebalim with ptur, but but by an owner to say that he's exempt, to say he's exempt if the owner is with him, even by a case of a paid watchman and a borrower, we would say he's not exempt. My timer. What's the reason? Meaning to say that this law of if the owner is with him, this exemption is only written by a renter, a paid worker, and a borrower, but not by a shomer sachar. So that's the one who says he's responsible, because the exemption was only written by a shomer sachar, not by a unpaid watchman. Umanda Amar, and according to the one who says that you're going to be exempt, Manda Amar, and the one who says that if the owner is with him, he's going to be exempt for his negligence. Umanda Amar Pater, the one who says he's exempt. Kasavar is of the position, Mikra Nidra Shafanav Lufnefanav, that the verse that refers to a borrower, if the owner is with him, he's exempt, was written all the way back, and it applies also to the case of the unpaid watchman. And therefore, when it says if the owner is with him, it's not just referring to the borrower, as Shomer Chinam Namiksiv. It's also written referring to the unpaid watchman. And so therefore he's going to be exempt even if he is negligent. And so the Gemara says, let's bring a proof for the position that the owner is with him, he's responsible, because it says in the Mishnah that we just learned, our Mishnah, now we learned that show us a para, you borrow the cow, and you borrow the owner with it, show us a para of the sachar ba'ima, or you hire the worker after you borrow the cow. Or let's say you borrow the owner or you rent them, and then you borrow the cow and it dies. Then under all these circumstances, we're going to say pater, because the owner was with him. So it says if you borrow, you rent, but it doesn't say you have an exemption if you're an unpaid watchman. And so therefore the exemption of the owner being with him does not apply to the unpaid watchman. Mar says, Otamech, Shomer Sachar Mikatani. Well, this case also, the case of the Mishnah doesn't mention if you were hired to watch it. It just says if you borrowed it and then you hire the owner. It doesn't say you if you are hired either. So it doesn't list any of the other categories. It only lists the borrower. Elatana Milsa Dechsiva Be'edja Katani. So therefore, we're going to say on 95b, the Tana only lists those things which were written explicitly in the Torah, i.e. the case of the borrower, but it doesn't list those categories which were not written explicitly in the Torah, i.e. the Shomer Chinam and the Shomer Sachar. So the Gemara is again trying to prove this idea that a watchman who is obligated a watchman is chayev for negligence, even if the owner was with him. So let's try and prove this from the Tosefta, Tashma Sha'ala V'Shal Ba'ala. Let's say you borrow the cow and the owner with it. Sechara is Chara Ba'ala, or you rent out the cow and the owner with it. Even though the owner at that point then goes does the work in another place, and he's not with him directly at that time, and then the animal dies, Mesa Potter. So the Gemara says, at first glance, we have to say, Savru Amani Rabbi Yehuda. He at first glance we say this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Socher Kishomer Socher Dami, that the renter is like a hired worker. And so therefore, the Haitana Katani Mil Sadasi Midrasha, and so therefore, we have to assume, let's say at the start, that this price is like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that since this price is talking about a renter, and we're saying the renter is like the hired worker, and still we're and we're going to say in this case he's going to be exempt because the owner is with him. Hi Tana Katani Mil said the Midrasha, and this author of this price writes those things that are learned out also from a drasha, meaning to say the renter, and it doesn't list this price, the idea that you're exempt if you're a shomer chinam. So we see from here the price don't list you're exempt if you're a renter, i.e., also a paid watchman. And so we see that the exemption only applies to a case of a borrower or a renter or a paid watchman, and not to one who watches for free. And so therefore, negligence is not an excuse. That negligence, if the owner is with him, you're still going to be responsible. The Gemara says, no. How money? This is Rabbi Meir. The author of this price is Rabbi Meir, who says Sochar Kishomer Chinam Tami, says the renter is like the Shomer Chinam, and so therefore we're saying that you are exempt even if you're Shomer Chinam. The Tana Shomer Chinam Shomer Sachar. It just says that you're exempt if the owner is with you. If you're an unpaid watchman, for sure. If you're a paid watchman, you buy same, or alternatively, or else we could amend the source like Rabbi Baravua did. Vitani. Sochar Ketzam Mishalem. How does the renter pay? Rabbi Meir says Kishomer Sachar. Rabbi Yehuda says Kishomer Chinam. Or alternatively, you could say that the Brisa follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the renter is like the hired worker, and actually Rabbi Yehuda is saying that in this case we switch the position of Rabbi Yehuda and say he's like the Shomer Chinam, the renter is like the Shomer Chinam, and so therefore it's completely consistent with the idea that you're exempt if the owner is with you if you're an unpaid watchman. So the Gemara doesn't resolve this question. The Gemara leaves unresolved, and the Rambam is strict here. The Rambam says that if you're watching it for free and you're negligent, you're still going to hold you responsible even if the owner is with you. Amar Rav Hamnun. So we just said in the Brisa that even if the owner was in another place, you're still going to be responsible. Excuse me, you're still going to be exempt. But wait, how is that owner is with you? He's in another place. You're here, and he's in another place. So why is that considered the owner is with you? So Amar Rav Hamnun says, now we want to talk about here is when do we say that you're exempt if the owner is with you? You're going to be responsible unless the cow is plowing, unless the owner is leading the cow or the donkey, and the owner is going with it. Meaning to say that that's the level of responsibility. And you're only going to be exempt and you're only going to be exempt if the owner is with you from the moment of borrowing until it breaks. Alma Kosavar, we see from here, there are Fuam Nuna's other position, Bava Metzia, when he says the owner has to be with you in order to be exempt. Akuam Milsa Kamashma. That's on the entire matter, meaning to say that when it says Bava Metzia, it goes from the borrowing all the way to the breaking. And only under those circumstances can we apply this exemption of the owner is with you. So the Gemara says, but what about this price that we just said? Masav Rava. What about the price? Shal v'shal ba'ima, schar v'sachar ba'ima, schar v'shal ba'ima, shal v'sachar ba'ima. Afal pisha ba'am osalam malachav b'makam acher. Even though the owner is doing work in another place, umeisa, and he dies, and the animal dies, pater. So we're going to say that even though the owner is doing work in another place, it's considered like the owner is with him. Doesn't that mean he's doing other work and he's still going to be exempt? So isn't this a direct refutation of Ramnun's principle? The Gemara says, no, it means ba'usa malacha. It means the owner is still there doing the same work. So if that's the case, why does it say b'makom acher? To come merapi v'azil kamei. It means that the owner is going in front of the animal and softening the land. And that's why we're saying that another place means he's a foot away, not not in like another field, but he's just a foot away. Gemara says it can't be. V'amid the seifa al gabeya al gabaha ve'reisha b'muachacharis. But from the fact that the seifa, the next clause in the Brisa is talking about specifically that he's dealing with the animal itself. The first clause, this clause must be is a different animal. What does the seifa say? The Ketani, the seifa says as follows. If he borrowed the cow and afterwards he borrowed the owner, even though the owner was plowing on its back, because there he's going to be responsible in that case because he didn't borrow the owner wasn't with him from the moment of borrowing. So if that's the case, we see that the seifa is really in the ratio is in a really totally different place, and we're still going to say it's exempt. Gemara says no. No, the first clause and the last clause they're dealing with the owner is with him doing the work. The ratio or busa kamashma and the seifa or busa kamashma. They're both teaching us an extra law. What are they teaching us? Ratio or busa kamashma teaching us an extra law. The ratio is teaching us that even though the owner is not directly on its back, he's still going to be exempt. But he's still doing the same type of work, even though because the owner was with him from the moment of the borrowing, he's going to be potter, he's exempt. We're safe for abusa kamashwan, and the concluding clause is teaching us a different novel teaching. The afagav al gaba, even though the owner is on the back, given the law since he wasn't there at the outset, he's chayev. So he's literally riding the ox, so riding the donkey. So even though the owner is riding the donkey, since he wasn't with him at the moment of the borrowing, he's not going to be responsible. Gemara says, wait 1 second. Hi, Mai, what does this even mean? If you're going to say that the first clause, he was with a different type of activity, and in the latter clause, he's doing that same activity. Hainu Rabusa, that's the Chiddush. But if you say both the first clause and the latter clause are dealing with the same type of work, my Rabusa, what Chiddush is it? They're both dealing with the same type of work. And so why would you draw a distinction? The Ode, and furthermore, the Tanya, didn't we learn in the Brisa? From the fact that it says if the owner is with him, he should not pay. Wouldn't I know that if he's not with him, you do pay? What does it mean when it says if the owner is not with him, then he has to pay? That as long as he's with him at the time of the borrowing, he doesn't need to be with him when the accident happens. But he needs to be with him at the moment of the borrowing. And another price that says, in fact, it says if the owner is with him, he has to pay. Wouldn't I know that if he's with him, he does not have to pay? Why does it say that if he's with him, he doesn't pay? It's to tell you that once he went out from the domain of the lender, one moment with the borrower, once he was with him at the time of the borrowing, and then the animal dies, is exempt. So we see from here that there's a refutation of Rav Hamnuna, because from these sources we're saying that as long as he was with him at the time of the lending, then he's going to be exempt. But if he wasn't with him at the time of the lending, he's going to be responsible. Tiyufta to Rav Hamnuna, Tiyufta. So this is indeed a refutation of Rav Huna. So how do we know this? How do we learn this out? So the Gemara says, Abai Saval Rabbi Oshaya, Mataras Lekrai Rabbi Oshaya. Rava Saval Rabbi Yonasan, Mataras Lekrai Rabbi Yonasan. So remember, we had learned on the previous page the position of Rabbi Oshaya and Rabbi Yonasan. We learned it with respect to the man who curses his father and his mother. It says, Isha Sheri Kalo, it's Avives Imo, one who curses his father and his mother, Motsimas, shall die. And we had on the bottom of 94b, we had a discussion there. What's the simple way to read it? Rabbi Oshaya says that you need to curse them both together. Rabbi Yochanan says even if you curse one of them. And so therefore, They should also be arguing with the case with respect to the borrowing, because it says it says if the animal breaks or dies, meaning to say that, and also it says at the verse the time of the borrowing and the time of the accident, and afterwards it mentions the owner is with him. Do we need that the owner is with him both times or just one of them? So Abai holds like Rabbi Oshaya, who says. Abai says like Rabbi Oshaya, meaning to say that it mentions, since it mentions both the time of the borrowing and the time of the accident. It says Bala ve'inimo shalem yishalem. The owner is not with him; he has to pay. Time of delay if he's not there by both of them. Ha'isa ba'hada v'leisa ba'hada. But if he's there with one of them, then we're going to say pater. But if he's just there with one of them, then he's going to be exempt. But what about the fact it says in Bala v'imo lo yishalem? It says if the owner is with him, he should not pay. And time of the Isa b'Travayo, Isa ba'adav, Isa ba'adav Mechayim, doesn't that apply? That if he's only with him, one of them is responsible. No, it's to tell you, Amar Chaya, Imo b'shas she'ela, Eno tzarech lios Imo b'shas shvuro meisa, Imo b'shas shvuro meisa, Eno tzarech lios Imo b'shas she'ela. That it's to tell us that if he was with him at the time of the borrowing, he doesn't need to be with him at the time of the breaking. But if he's with him at the time of the breaking, he would still need to be with him at the time of the borrowing in order to be exempt. So, okay, look, you know what? We're going to start up from this piece again tomorrow morning, or tonight afternoon, this afternoon. All right, we'll stop here. Anybody have any questions?